The Symphony of Canterlot, Chapter 2, Part 2. In spite of that, however, I decided to take one out and jam it into my right ribcage, inject the juice in, and let the magic do its work. The problem with that, though...
Oh, son of a bitch! Celestia is getting sodomized by a minotaur!
The process hurt like finding Prince Blueblood going into town on what was going to be your date that evening over the kitchen table. And that is with the opiates, not to mention the booze as well. After what must been a few minutes of me cursing every form of life on the planet and uttering blasphemies against deities both living and dead, the pain began to dull, and I was readying to get back up. I cracked my neck, got up, and started to move forward once more. I had work to do, and I didn't really feel like dying at the time, so sitting there just to wait for my doom, that was out of the question. I was in less pain, but as you can guess, my remarkable senses were a bit dulled at that moment by the remarkable cocktail of medication I had just put myself through. I soldiered on either way, and I started to notice something. I wasn't surrounded by oak doors, beautifully styled emerald green wallpaper, or brass electric lamps. I was now in what must have been a late pre-Celestia stone corridor. Crap. Chapter 3. Dungeons, Blood, and Frustration. Crap. I said that. Again. There was the fact that wherever I was at the time was all, by standards, a world created. Or maybe it was a world that was acquired. Either way, the place felt alien and unnatural. The feeling of ants crawling under my skin permeating my whole being. And finally, the temperature. It was freezing. It was just freezing. My breath was even visible as I kept trotting, and it wasn't even for the lack of water. There would have been frost on the walls as well. The feeling that maybe this was all a sadistic magical treadmill, that was just creeping up into the front of my mind. That was making me trot in the same place like I was in some sort of laboratory, or I was a laboratory rodent who was fed the ultimate vitality pill. The poor little bastard exploded 10 seconds afterward, by the way. That was something that a Pragio was not above doing to a fully sapient pony. Forget about just bringing the double barrel. I should have brought a few liters of ether fuel, dynamite, and our radio signal detonator. I should have been blowing the fucking theater into the 9 circles of Sheol from whence it came. I'd rather be charged with domestic terrorism than not getting the right to see the damn place reduced to rubble, melted steel, and fucking glass. Once I stopped yelling at the empty space in front of me, and I finished venting my frustration at no pony in particular, I decided to keep going and hope to see a way back into the mortal realm. I should have come better armed. If I would have known that I had to break out of a pocket realm, I would have brought company. Maybe a Gatling gun. After processing that thought of potential mayhem and destruction, I noticed a glint of light in my right forehoof. As a result, I galloped at full speed, ignoring the growing pain in my side. I started seeing more light, and as more light showed, the closer I got to the end of the corridor. Then, I jumped and used the gathered momentum and my back to smash through the ancient petrified door. I stumbled and fell, rolling once into the ground and using the movement to quickly get back up. And then, snow. Snow as far as the eye could see. A blanket of snow and a petrified and dead forest of black trees surrounding a medieval stone dungeon. I looked back and saw it carved with artisan precision. The Sonorad! As if the world felt like my arse wasn't tight enough, the ground began to shake, and thin, muscular forelegs began to forcibly sprout from the black earth underneath in the white blanket of snow. Rising from the ground were tall, hairless, and nearly skeletal earthen ponies, their skin pale, their eye sockets empty, and their mouths filled with abnormally sharp predatory teeth. Blood-red fog was spilling from their eye sockets and ghastly maws. An unnatural smell of putrefaction surrounded the area despite the freezing temperatures. Revenants, how vulgar. I lit my horn in anticipation, cracking my neck in preparation from the coming slaughter.
Well, rip and tear until it's done!
I roared at the top of my lungs with wrath and ferocity. I telekinetically unsheathed my Kurdish dagger and lunged it at the skull of the nearest undead horror, known as a revenant. The horror seemed to have been charging a flaming blast my way, so, in response, I rolled to the side and telekinetically retrieved my dagger from a distance. Immediately, the fire blast hit the other horror that was behind me, causing it to explode in a flaming confetti of blood, flesh, and bone fractures, and some of it just splashed my coat in red. The rest of the horrors braced themselves, and as far as I could tell, there were around 12, well, minus the one that was reduced to gore, meaning that I only had 11 to deal with. I really like those odds. They galloped towards me, screaming like banshees for blood. The first one tried to go for my face, and I used the dagger to sever its left forehoof, grabbing that same forehoof telekinetically, and smacked the revenant to its left with it, sending its jaw flying, splattering more blood upon me. I then heard another one behind me, so I leaped and lunged my dagger at the back of its neck, and we both fell onto the snow during our struggle. I held that particular revenant with my left forehoof, forcing both of us to stand in a bipedal fashion. They then began to charge their fire blast to turn me into red paste. I telekinetically threw my hostage to the one into the center, causing both revenants to explode in fire, blood, and flesh, and the rest fired incoherently at any other direction that my own as a result. I galloped and stabbed the neck of the nearest one to my right, and the two to my left lunged at me once, and in response I ducked, causing both creatures to sink their fangs onto their presumed comrade. The remaining two were already above me, so I just rolled to my left, barely avoiding them. I telekinetically threw 5 of my throwing knives while mentally aiming for their chests, and they hit their marks precisely. Then I electrified the 2 remaining revenants with my magic, using the knives in their chests as lightning rods and frying them both in a couple of seconds. The ones that I left to feast were ripping and devouring their comrade with the same gusto that my lovely Redheart had while devouring dinner after a 16-hour shift. As I drew closer, they noticed me and lunged not a second after. I blasted them with a concussion spell, causing them both to impact with bone-shattering force into the dead trees behind them. I decided to telekinetically draw my Snub 44 revolver and shoot them both in the right hemisphere of the frontal lobe with my remaining 2 rounds. I then sheathed my dagger and hid the revolver back in my coat, which was now covered in the freezing undead blood of revenants, along with my face and certainly both my forehooves. My breath was short, but I had to get a plan to get out of this nightmare, and all the materials that had been graciously donated to me. Well, talk about slaughter. An unspecified amount of time later, I gathered 6 out of the 13 revenant skulls and placed them around me at equal distances away from each other. I drew a circle using the skulls as reference points and used the crimson revenant blood as ink. Despite the blood freezing, I was able to scrape it off the snow and, not to mention, extracting it from the corpses. I melted it using the top of one of the revenant skulls as a little boiling pot and my pyrokinesis as a source of heat for the procedure. A rune burned in each skull, 6 in total, and 4 runes were drawn into the snow within the circle, and a drawn triangle was connecting 3 of the skulls. I pulled out my notebook out of the coat. Yes, the black one that is bound in snake leather. I told you that it was going to come into play eventually. I opened the notebook around the middle and used 2 blank pages to draw a rune that I hoped would send me home. I also had La Piece de Resistance, a heart from one of the 2 revenants that I finished off with ammunition. I placed the heart onto the top of the notebook and readied my Kurdish dagger for the last piece of the puzzle. I lit my horn, concentrating in surrounding my dagger's blade in raw ether. The blade sparked as it acquired an orange glow, and I closed my eyes, took a deep breath from the surrounding cold air, and I pierced the revenant's heart with my dagger, the crackling sound of electricity coming from around me. And then, I heard the howling sound of eternity, and I was enveloped in darkness. My return to the world of the living was rather explosive. The large boom followed by my unprecedented fall to the marble floor was rather disorientating, and I slowly got back up to my 4 hooves. I opened my eyes to my murky vision and terrible, terrible feeling of nausea, which I relieved in the immediate vicinity. My rather violent oral excretion consisted of black bile combined with what I can only assume was to be my own blood. I better check that out. I don't think that's something I can treat myself. I then heard the door open to my right. I decided to enter based on a single fact. It was the entrance to the concert hall B5, the practice area of the Canterlot Orchestra. I was covered in blood that was starting to coagulate, and I thought one of my ribs had refractured during that fight. I smelled like the dead, and the pains around my whole body could only be described as being run over by a runaway carriage during rush hour with a migraine. And I thought that my hat was missing. I wasn't so much trotting through the concert hall as I was limping, and I noticed that there were shadows following me. When I looked back at them, they scurried like a field of rabbits smelling the presence of a wolf. Good. I really wasn't sure if I could keep fighting. I noticed that in the front row, in the chair closest to the orchestra stage, was a cello, but it wasn't just any cello, it was Madame Octavia's prize cello. Checkmate. It was a beautiful piece, made from finely polished and varnished timberwolf with a gold engraving of her initials onto the back, and the strings made from the silk of a zebrakin gargantua spider. The sheer cost to create the damn instrument was just already evil enough as is. Don't get me even started on the smell of putrefaction and misery that it was emanating. And if you think that it is the beasts that were slain from its material that I'm referring to as loss of life, then you have no idea of the average survivability of the common untrained pony against such things. I then noticed that a few strands of Madame Octavia's mane were stuck in the pegs. I looked around and saw the curtain, which gave me a less than favorable idea. I mentally measured the cello at 122 centimeters long by 45 centimeters wide. So with that, I needed at least a 244 centimeter long by 90 centimeter wide area worth of cloth to be able to wrap it properly and protect it from further tampering until I brought it back to my study for analysis.